Right, good afternoon, everybody. So this side session is we're going to talk about how you can access and use CMIP data and some of the background you should know about what's going on. We've got a number of presenters here, so myself, I'm Matt. We've got James, Phil, Charlotte, Aparna and Martin presenting today, which will be swapping back and forth. But this is all built on a lot of work by the technical community behind CMIP and on behalf of the WIP and the ESGF projects. So here's what we're going through today. First off, touching on how you're going to, how you can get hold of CMIP data, what you need to know about it, and then there's some background on ESGF and producing and publishing CMIP 7 data, so that you get an understanding of what we're going through to produce this. You understand what the data is and how you can work with it. And we'll finish up with community resource links. There's a Slido set up, so if you've got questions, you can ask there, but we'll have another number of pauses throughout the presentation to look at that. We've also got a help desk in room B2 talking about the infrastructure, so many of us will be hanging around there at various times throughout this week. If you've got questions, come and find us. We're more than happy to help. Okay, first section, how do I get hold of CMIP data? A little bit of history first. So here's some timelines for the CMIP data that's generally available at the moment. So CMIP 5 data is produced sort of back in 2011 to 2016. This is currently available on ESGF, but due to some changes with the new infrastructure and upgrades coming that Phil will talk about, that data will disappear temporarily from ESGF. We hope to have it back in the medium term. A lot of the data that you've hopefully been working with is CMIP 6 based. This, we've got something like 25 petabytes of data out there across all the ESGF nodes. This was closed to new publications in April 2025, about a year ago, to give the ESGF community time to get set for the next generation development. We have, one thing that was mentioned in the IPCC talk yesterday was CMIP 6 plus data. This is a bridging activity we put together to allow new MIPs and to define new experiments and come in after CMIP 6, but use the same standards and infrastructure. So there's a few minor changes to how the data is laid out compared to CMIP 6, but it should be very, very similar and has allowed us to publish updates to DCPP, large ensemble single forcing MIPs, and tip MIP data is up on ESGF there as well. CMIP 7 data will be coming soon. We're on hopefully the last approach to having the full infrastructure ready and available. Okay. One option to get you looking at CMIP data quickly is a number of interactive atlases around. So there is the Copernicus Climate Change Service have an atlas alongside the IPCC, and we have the EO Data Hub, Earth Observation Data Hub, allows you to explore the data as well. Many of these allow you to subset, post-process, and download the data, so you can do sort of preliminary steps there. But I suspect most people will be looking at the ESGF search pages. This is something that has been updated since CMIP 6 begun. We've got the new MetaGrid interface, allow you to search for any facet of the data, and is deployed at a number of the ESGF centres. So Cedar, Oak Ridge, DKIZ, I believe there's another one at NCI in Australia. If you're looking for command line tools to get hold of the data, so things you might be able to sort of automate large sets of transfers, we've got a tool called ESG Pull developed by the ESGF community, and this you can use to search and then set up a download queue and retrieve data that way. There are some older interfaces, such as ESG Pi client, which will not work with the new ESGF infrastructure. So we'll be, just be aware that there are changes coming that you may need to react to. I'm going to hand over to Aparna now, who's going to talk about some of the other means for getting and analysing data.
Thank you, Matt. Good afternoon, everyone. If you're all gathered here, it likely means that you do appreciate both the pain and the gain involved in large, growing data volumes such as CMIP. So thank you for being here. And we also likely have our own favorite ways of accessing data, which we are referring to as data access patterns here. And this could be a data download activity or data access format, or it could be a data streaming activity using cloud computing. And when it comes to cloud computing, there's not just one cloud service provider out there. There are multiple cloud service providers out there. But all of this, in the grand scheme of things, is to help our workflows scale better and also open ways to collaborate better. So that's really the challenge, as in how are we in the midst of this leveraging the modern data architecture? Because that transition may not be seamless for many of us. But as a community, with community-driven efforts, it is possible. And so I want to reframe these challenges as opportunities in modern data architecture. So as part of an informal activity under the ESGF Pangeo Cloud Data Working Group, we supported the use of what's called data catalogs, especially the intake ESM catalogs, which not only help us with data search, but it also blends in beautifully with our existing analysis pipeline that uses Python. The other effort through this Cloud Data Working Group and several other community collaborators here, we also hosted a subset of the CMIP 6 data sets in the cloud, both the NetCDF format and the ZAR format. I do encourage you to check it out if you haven't and see how the cloud optimized and analysis-ready data sets can be useful in your pipeline. So I mentioned ZAR. So what is ZAR in a nutshell? You know, it helps you transform the large scientific data sets that we really deal with and make it really scalable. So if you imagine a data cube or maybe a Jenga tower, such as the picture over here, how cool would it be if you just, work with individual pieces and chunks so that the entire process is much more efficient without having to touch the other parts that we don't really have to. That's really the power that ZAR brings in, making things very scalable here. But when it comes to the interface, the user interface, if you're used to Xarray, which is a data analysis package, and you're already reading NetCDF datasets, it will look exactly the same or very familiar to you if you open up a ZAR dataset, such as the picture shown in the left corner here. Which means familiarity is really key for us to have that transition to get into that core of the modern data architecture so we can develop scalable analytics as well. So I did mention ZAR, but the reality is that the modeling centers do produce NetCDF datasets. So is there a mechanism for us to actually leverage ZAR, but be able to use the NetCDF source datasets? That opens up opportunities, and that's called virtualizar. I do encourage you to read more about virtualizar, which really eliminates the need for us to rewrite the NetCDF datasets, but unleash the power of ZAR. There's also another data format called IceChunk if you're looking into, say, version-controlled ZAR format where it's in a multi-user environment. I do welcome all of you to check out the GitHub repository here and invite contributions. I also want to give a shout out to Leap and Carbon Plan because some of these efforts in terms of the virtualized ZAR are being pioneered by them. But we need your feedback, your input, and your contributions so that we have a large mix of use cases with different perspectives. So what it means when we are talking about IceChunk and ZAR for a data user or a reader, it's as simple as just using an open ZAR function. Again, familiarity is key here. I also want to wrap up by going back to the data catalogs topic. If you are curious to see how you can navigate through the ESGF data landscape in a familiar format, if you're already used to using intake or intake ESM catalogs, and you have different kind of data access patterns, you're interested in data download, or you're interested in just streaming the data in a cloud computing environment, intake ESGF might be your friend. So please check out read the docs here and contact us if you have more questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Aparna. Right, so the first opportunity for Q&A. So if anyone's got any questions, or if you've got questions on Slido or online, please do shout. Don't think we've got anyone in the room. Anything online? Nope. Okay. I think I'll move on then. So the next section is what do you need to know about using CMIP data? So particularly having a look at some of the changes that are coming through for CMIP 7. One thing I'd want to highlight first here is the errata service. This has been around throughout CMIP 6. It's part of the ESDoc landscape before, and it allows it allowed modelling groups to put up issues related to changes with the data. So explaining why they were issuing a new version of the data set. So simplest version might be the pre-industrial control run. You initially start off by publishing 500 years, but then you want to extend that to 1,000 years. So you issue an errata update to say, we've extended the data set and indicate everything that you've done there. But alongside that, there are, of course, times when there are problems with the data sets. You've made a mistake in the data, the units, the metadata. This can all be declared on this service and allows you to indicate whether or not this is something you're going to replace or this is something that users will have to get used to working with. So CMIP 6, this is all very much focused on what the modelling groups want to provide. Change that's been implemented recently by the developers at IPSL is that users can now propose errata. So if you go to the errata link there, you'll see a green button at the top where you can propose an issue with data. This will then create a record that gets passed to the modelling groups, and they've got something like 2 weeks to review and respond to that errata before it goes public on the errata database. So hopefully this is a nice mechanism for enhancing feedback and getting the modelling groups more involved and responding to issues that people find. There is also an API available, so if there are if you've got tools which you want to wrap and check whether or not there are errata from data you're working with, you can do that. We've got a firm intention to integrate these tools into ESGF in the future to make sure when you do a search on Metagrid or maybe a search on intake ESGF, you'll get a flag to say, there's an errata, it's linked here, you can go and have a look at it, see whether it's something that affects how you want to work. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Charlotte now to talk about some of the EMD and citation services.
Thank you. So EMD is essential model documentation, and it's information about the models that are contributing data to CMIP. And we've taken a different approach to model documentation in CMIP 7 compared to that with CMIP 6. Our ambition is to make it much easier to create the model documentation. And for that model documentation to be more useful, it needs to have been captured across the board for all of the models. So model documentation is going to be mandatory for CMIP 7 in order to be able to have 100% coverage. But our compromise that we made is to make that documentation much easier for the modelling centres to provide. With 100% coverage of model documentation, it makes it a reliable entry point so that all users of CMIP 7 outputs can know that there's going to be documentation. So that's important for analysts and downscalers, archive service providers, and also climate services. Another aspect of the using of CMIP data is that we want you to be able to tell us, or tell the world, what CMIP data you have used. And in order to do that, we've got a citation service for data. So data citations, they're permanent DOI'd linked data resources, and they describe the model and the experiment. And they also provide a list of the authors who configured that model to simulate the experiment. So data citation is a really important mechanism for transparency. These citations give credit to the modelling groups, and that's a really important factor when modelling groups themselves need to justify to their funders what is the impact of all of this investment. Data citations are important for making data fair. That's findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And we're working with the Research Data Alliance to aggregate citations into what we call, at the moment, complex citations, but these aggregated citation resources should then be able to be referenced in the journal articles that you produce. I'm going to move to the next slide. So this is about using citations. For the IPCC 7th Assessment Report, the authors are going to be asked to list the input data sets they used to create figures. And with that, we will be able to build these complex citation objects for each of these, the figure outputs in the assessment report. And with that, we have a completely transparent and machine accessible connection that goes from IPCC outputs to the CMIP data resources that reside on ESGF. And this is a hugely important innovation in terms of being able to demonstrate the impact that data is having. But we will also ask people to put acknowledgement text in their journal articles when they use CMIP resources. And there's information about that on the CMIP 7 guidance pages. So I'm actually going to hand over to James Anstey now, who is planning to talk to us about branded variables.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So yeah, users of CMIP 7 data will need to know that there is a new systematic approach to naming variables that has been introduced in CMIP 7. And the intention of this scheme is to make it easier to find the variables you want, although, of course, because it's new, some adjustment will be required. What this means is best illustrated, I think, by this example shown here on the slide. So this variable, AMON-TAS, so monthly mean near-surface air temperature for the whole globe. So the TAS variable, which is found in the AMON table for CMIP 6. In CMIP 7, that's identified by this branded variable name that's shown to the right of that. Okay, so you can see by looking at this example, the TAS, the short variable name, identifying atmospheric near-surface temperature, that's the same. That hasn't changed. But this colorful string of 4 labels is the new thing. That's called the branding suffix. And each bit of the label tells you something different about that, how that data is sampled. So in this example, it's time averaged. The first bit is the temporal label. It's at height 2 meters. It's on a horizontally gridded field. And the last label indicates, that's the area label. It indicates it's unmasked in this case, but for other variables, it could indicate the masking. So the branded variable is not specific to frequency and region. So to be fully equivalent to AMON-TAS, you need to also specify a frequency, monthly in this case, and a region, which is global. So to uniquely identify a variable then, in the data request, we've specified a compound, so-called compound name, which is this long string in green that you see at the bottom. Granted, it looks more complicated than the AMON-TAS that you would expect from CMIP 6, but it's also more informative. Okay, and that is a unique identifier of a requested variable. So now just to illustrate again with an example, suppose in Python you were making a dictionary of your data set attributes. Well, these ones on the left are the same. You see the variable ID at the top, that's the TAS I already mentioned, and then all the other stuff that identifies a model run, essentially. Well, there's the version also at the end. And then different attributes are shown on the right there. So the CMIP 6 case, you have a table ID, AMON, but those table IDs are not used anymore in CMIP 7. And then the CMIP 7 equivalent is essentially a description of the sampling, but with higher granularity. So a branded suffix, the region, and the frequency. And it's also important to highlight the grid label appears in both, but the usage of grid label is different in CMIP 7. I mean, it still indicates a horizontal grid, but as Martin will say more about in a few slides' time, the grid labels in CMIP 7 will uniquely identify grids, and they'll be registered at the point when one does EMD registration, as Charlotte already just described about the EMD. And there'll be more on the registration process later that Martin will talk about. And then finally here, I just want to point out the DRS, the data reference syntax. So this basically refers to how attributes are used to uniquely identify a data set, and they are used in the construction of file names and directory names. And the purpose of this slide is just to point out how this is a slight evolution from CMIP 6, but there's actually not a whole lot that's different. If you compare the CMIP 7 and CMIP 6 directory and file names, you'll see that most of the elements are the same. The description of the variable and its sampling uses the branded label, but otherwise the construction is mostly the same as in CMIP 6. And the data request provides a mapping from the two types of variable names, so that you can unambiguously identify a variable that was in CMIP 6 and find what its new name is in CMIP 7. Okay. So we'll just pause for a moment for Q&A if anyone has any questions on things that users need to know when using CMIP 7 data, whether in the room or online.
So we've got a question here from online. Will the model documentation be accessible by API to search, for example, for the presence of certain model components? Don't know, Charlotte, if you're happy to come and comment on that.
Yes.
Lovely. Nice and straightforward. Thank you. Yep. Documentation on that should be appearing on the CMIP 7 guidance pages or linked to from the EMD documentation pages. Other questions? By input datasets, do you mean the CMIP 7 datasets as per input for MIPS, so that each experiment needs to track which CMIP 7 dataset it uses? Not quite sure the context of that question. Don't quite know when that, where that related to, so perhaps we'll skip on that. Paul Leopardi will try and sort of, if you can contact us and let us know the context for that, we'll try and extend that. Question in the room, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So you showed one slide with the erratas, right? And my question is there a plan to have a way in which when people look for that data or download data that has some kind of flag for that to show? So is there a way to directly connect the erratas with the data you download if there's something you need the users to know about the data they're downloading?
I don't think we have a plan for that. Someone, correct me if I haven't heard about it, I think the users just need to be aware that the errata exists and that they should check the errata for data sets they're using. But someone contradict me if that's wrong.
Yeah, Phil can comment.
There is a possibility we could tag the data with the errata and just flag it up. Yeah. I think that would be really helpful, wouldn't it? When you're searching the data, you actually see that there is an errata attached with it.
Yeah, that would be a suggestion, right? I feel like it would be impossible to ask every user to go check every errata, right? But if you have just like exclamation mark next to one piece of data where you know that there's an errata, then it's on the user to go check what's wrong with that.
Oh, I see. You mean to indicate like on the ESGF
to indicate
interface.
that a piece
Right.
of data has
Yes.
any kind of warning, so a kind of flag for that. Yeah, that would be sort of more of a suggestion than
That's something I hope we can look at.
That's great. Yeah.
Okay, another question here. When using ESG pull to download, some datasets always show as failed. How can I resolve this issue? So, slightly challenging in that the ESGF nodes that we have, sometimes they're up, sometimes they're down, and we need to sort of perhaps make better indication through these tools what's working and what's not. Question in the room? Mm-hmm.
Are there any plans to have the model documentation include the model diagnostics so that we can have all this in one place for the users?
You mean like, for example, to say point to the ref diagnostics, for
Correct.
example?
Yes.
I don't believe so, but again, if any, Charlotte has that plan for the EMD?
My understanding is that the various components, the essential model documentation and the citations, etc., there will be links to those from the ESGF landing pages for a data set. I don't know about the ref links to ESGF because that's not been my experience, but I suspect that the ref information is also going to be linked from those dataset pages. But I don't know.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other. Do we have time for one more question in the room?
Jared's just coming forward and might
Or
be able to
perhaps a
comment on the
comment?
ref.
Yeah, we've thought about trying to link all these things together. I do think it's incredibly important to link all these different services together. When that happens, that's up for discussion, but that's on the kind of the roadmap, I would say. I think we need to make sure everything intercommunicates really well.
Yeah, I agree. It's a good idea. Okay. Hand over to Phil to talk about ESGF.
Okay, so I just want to take a bit of a step back and think about the underlying infrastructure that's providing all these services. So, and talk about our System Grid Federation. So there's quite a lot on this slide. I just want to focus on the left-hand side for a minute. We're talking about ESGF very freely here. There might be some in the room that actually don't know much about it. It's an international consortium and a globally distributed data infrastructure providing access to a system model data, including CMIP data. And our focus for ESGF clearly at the moment is preparation for CMIP 7 data. So ESGF has been around for quite some time. If you were looking really closely at Helen's slide yesterday, you see on her timeline that it started out in 2009. So that's a really quite a long time. So in 2019, we started a whole process of refactoring, re-engineering, reimagining the architecture for ESGF. And what's resulted from that is what we're calling ESGF NG, or next generation. So on the right-hand side here, we've got quite a few bullet points. I think what I'll do is I will go through those in the next slide. I've kind of got like a graphical representation of the new architecture. So I'll go through those points in turn. But a couple of things to draw your attention to. We're not using, if you are familiar with the traditional ESGF system, we're not using OpenID anymore. And you don't have to authenticate to access the data. So it's the same as with CMIP 6. The data access is open. However, if you need to publish data, so if you're a data node, then of course you will need to authenticate, but it's with a new system. The other thing to point out that's really different is that we're using a new search interface called STAC. And STAC is an open standard that's used widely in the Earth observation community for cataloging Earth observation data. And this move has been largely motivated by that, by a desire to make ESGF data interoperable with other systems so that you've got basically easier access. We lessen the friction for you to use APIs and tools to do that searching for the data. So I'm going to gradually build up some layers in this diagram. So you've got a big blank area in the middle at the moment. But just focusing on the bottom there, the fundamental of ESGF is the idea of having lots of different sites internationally that host data. And this will be true for CMIP 7. So we'll have a number of different sites around the world where you can access that CMIP 7 data. And they come in different kind of categories. This is something that over the years we've realized that there are different kind of capabilities for each site. And it's important to kind of think of those in different ways, different pieces of functionality. So with tier 1 data nodes, that's where you've got a fuller set of the data, and maybe you've got compute alongside that data as well, so perhaps HPC facilities or some kind of analysis capability within that resource. And then you've got tier 2, tier 3 data nodes as well with varying capabilities. So that in itself is useful, but without the search capability, we don't actually have a federation. We don't have the way of gluing all these different sites together and providing one service. So that's what this second layer provides. And again, it looks rather complicated, but I'll talk you through it. So if we think of, on the bottom left, we've got a data node. So They are ready to publish some data into the Federation. So they actually have the data on disk at the site, but they want to make that available to the community through ESGF. So they publish the data, and it goes into a message queue system, which is a technology for distributing information to multiple different actors or clients in a system. And so this is what we're using to replace the traditional system that we had with the original ESGF, where we had this system of a number of different index nodes, as we call them, around the Federation. So index nodes are basically points at which you can search for the data and access it. A lot of the feedback from the first version of ESGF was it got rather complicated. And so what we've tried to do in this new architecture is have a simpler approach where we've got two major index nodes, so two places where you can search for the data. Those two places are identical to each other, so if you do a search at one place, you can do an identical search at the other location and get the same search results. And that's made possible by this message queue. So when the data node is ready to publish data, it goes into a message queue, and each of those two sites subscribe to that message queue and receive the publication information, so they got identical copies of that information. So we've got a West catalog and an East catalog. So West is being hosted by Globus in the US, and the East catalog by CEDA in the UK. So in this final layer, you can see some of the client tools that we talked about. Of course, it's not exhaustive. You could write your own client software in Python or other languages using the APIs, but these are some of the main ones which we're supporting. So over on the left-hand side, we've got Metagrid, which Matt showed a screenshot for, and Intake ESGF, which is a Python client for searching for the data using a command line or Jupyter Notebooks, and then ESG Pull, which can be used for bulk data transfer and replication, and then, of course, other client software as well. So just a final point, the ESGF data statistics service is something that we've had pretty much throughout ESGF's life, and this continues in the new system as well. And what it does is it pulls information, log information from all of the data nodes and compiles statistics for downloads, access, number of data sets, the total volume of data hosted in ESGF. So it provides a really great resource for the community and for stakeholders. And you can see in this screenshot here on the map all the different nodes around the world and some of the headline statistics for access to the data. So we've got time for some more questions if anyone has any specific questions about the new ESGF system.
So, question in the room?
Thank you very much. Very interesting. I'm wondering about why only two index nodes? Is it because of resources, or is it other reasons?
Yeah, so we've been through a long process since 2019. In 2019, we got together technical representatives from the Federation, so representatives from node operators, and the overwhelming feedback was that the system was too complicated as it stood. And one of the pain points in terms of maintaining the system was the fact that there were all these index nodes, and the node operators didn't want the burden of running index nodes. So it's not a lack of resources. I think it's more of a desire to simplify the system that's really motivating it. And I think things have moved on quite a lot in the time since we first designed ESGF. With cloud services, we can host more resilient indexes in the cloud. So it gives us more capability, and that's in part as well driving a motivation for the new design. There's certainly the possibility, if we want to add other index nodes. So it's not a architectural limitation. It's a choice. It's a sort of a deployment choice, if you see what I mean. So if we wanted to add in a third index node, we could definitely do that. Okay.
Okay, Phil, another question probably for you on ESGF to do with keeping other projects synchronized, like getting the catalog synchronized for input for MIPS. I think this is another more operational question about trying to make sure that the different nodes are talking to each other about keeping things in sync there, but any comment on that?
I think I would just comment that one of the things that was really motivating us for the new system was to be able to support multiple projects in an independent way. And so you have this concept of a DRS for CMIP 7. There is a DRS for all the other projects as well. And so it's giving us a way of keeping a clear separation of concerns so that we can support multiple projects within the same infrastructure. I'm not sure I've quite answered the question, but I think...
Yeah, we'll come back and try and put a good answer online.
Yeah.
Another one, in the room.
Thanks, Phil. I just have a question on the use application. So I see that all of them are web access. Are there any chances that you'll have the off-grid access, especially for the global south that cannot be able to have good connection to get access to data through the web access? Because all of them seems like that, has that been taken into consideration in the next generation ESGF structure?
I think there are different approaches that could be used. So you could have one scenario where you do have a reasonable internet connection, enough that you could do some remote compute. So some of the tier 1 nodes actually have compute co-located with the data. So that might be one approach, so that you don't actually have to move the data. You can do the compute over a network connection. Another approach could be something like ESG pool, where you do a one-off transfer of the data when you do have a connection, but then you do all of your analysis in situ in that one place once you've cached all the data. There could be other permutations as well. So I think, given the federated nature of the architecture, there are different ways that you could configure for different user needs. So hopefully that could be covered.
Lovely. Thanks, Phil. I think we're going to move on to the next section. There will be more time for questions at the end. So I think, James, you're up.
Okay, so this part of the talk is about producing and publishing CMIP 7 data. So this is mainly aimed at modeling centers who are producing the simulations. So this slide gives an overview of the key steps in the publication process. Now, plenty of details are given on the guidance pages, which have been will be pointed to at the end and have been pointed out in multiple slides in this talk. The intention here is just to emphasize the really key steps and when they have to be done. So the output variables, of course, have to be configured. You have to decide what you're going to produce. I'll say more about the data request on the next slide. And the model needs to be registered. Martin will say more about this. Charlotte has already introduced the EMD. But the key thing is that you need a registered source ID as well as registered output grids to begin producing CMORized data. CMORized data, of course, is data that has been, the NetCDF files have the appropriate metadata to conform to the CMIP standards. And as most people know, I'm sure, CMOR is a widely used software package for doing that. But I'm using the term CMORized here to refer more generally to NetCDF files that meet that standard. It's also important early on to check the quality of your data by running the QC tool provided. Again, Martin will give more of the details. But the key point is that compliance with the QC is now mandatory in CMIP in order to improve the quality of the data that is published. We heard a lot about the importance of that in the ref session, side session yesterday afternoon. So it's very useful for modelers to do that early on to ensure that their data is compliant. Of course, if you are using CMOR, that is the intention, that it produces compliant data, but it's still a good idea to check. There's also a new step of repacking NetCDF files. This is new in CMIP 7. and a tool is provided to do that. And then finally, of course, publishing to ESGF by setting up a node and running the ESGF publisher. And of course, you just heard a lot from Phil about all the details of ESGF. So to say a bit more about the data request, anyone who is preparing CMIP data for publication no doubt has already looked at the data request. Just to emphasize a couple things about it, there is a core request. This is new in CMIP 7, 131 variables that should be regarded as the highest priority and produced for all experiments. So that's very simple, same request for all experiments. There's a paper that you can find links to it on the guidance that describes how this core request was developed. The data request is organized into so-called opportunities that encapsulate scientific goals and provide the rationale for why variables are requested. And you can view the data request in several ways via this Airtable interface. There's a screenshot at the top there. Also the web viewer, which provides a nice interface similar to the one that existed for CMIP 6 in some ways, and also a Python API. Okay, so now I'll hand over to Martin.
Yeah, providing the EMD is mandatory for the model registration, and as a modeling group, when you register your model with the EMD, at the end of the process, automatically the source ID for your model will be registered with the controlled vocabulary, and also you will be issued grid labels for your model components, native grids, that will as well be registered with the controlled vocabulary. And those attributes are needed for the summarization of your data. The registration process itself is a multi-stage process. You start off with registering the model components native grids. Then you go on with registering the model components, and at last you register the top-level model. You do that by filling out GitHub issue forms, and each submission of that forms will be reviewed. In total, it may take up to 2 weeks for a full registration of a model. The accepted EMD is stored on GitHub, and it can be changed. So you can request changes via the standard GitHub issue and pull request procedure. Only the source ID and grid label that are part of the controlled vocabularies, they cannot be altered anymore. Yeah, all CMIP 7 datasets will have a grid label. So when you want to publish your model output not on your model's native grids, but on a certain output grid, for example, some regular grid, also this grid will have to be registered. You can use the basic stage 1 grid cell registration form for that to register such output grids. And a grid label uniquely identifies the horizontal grid across all models that participate in CMIP. And the grid label is used for summarization, so it will become part of the file name, it will become part of the directory structure, and as well of the global attributes of the netcdf file. So you have to also register those grids before starting the summarization. The meanings of grid labels can be looked up online, as they are just a G with attached 3-digit number. Yeah, when you are interacting with the data request to set up your model output configuration, we recommend to use the latest version of the data request. That is version 1.2.2.3 at the moment. And it is also the source that is used to create the latest version of the CMIP 7 CMAR tables at the moment. If you want to really know what changed between the various releases of the data request, there are release notes available, and also the data request web view that James mentioned before. It has some tool that allows you to browse through the data request variable changes. The controlled vocabularies are a set of metadata terms that are basically the allowed terms to define CMIP data. And these terms, as I already mentioned before, they include also the source ID and grid labels registered via the EMD registration process. And there is a new vocabulary service available called ESGVoc that manages the CVs of the various WCRP projects behind the scenes between the various infrastructure components. So it provides a programmatic interface to the CVs. As normal data user or data provider, usually you will not have to interact much with ESGVoc. Yeah, but it, as I said, works its magic primarily behind the scenes. Yeah, there has also been an update to the climate model output rewriter that enables it to rewrite data in a CMIP 7 compliant format. As James already mentioned, the CMOR tables no longer specify frequency and region, and so the user who applies CMOR has to provide those as input. An example Jupyter notebook that illustrates this is available. There is another mandatory processing step after the CMORization that has to be done. So we would like the data to be cloud ready, so that the access, especially via cloud services, to the data is very efficient and fast. There needs to be an optimized internal chunking applied to the netcdf files. And CMIP 7 repack is a script that is provided that does just that in a plug-and-play fashion. So you will not have to have a complicated setup of the tool. It should work out of the box to rewrite your data in the required configuration. So metadata and data remains unchanged by the tool, only they are only reorganized. This should really be the final processing step, because when you alter the data later with another tool, you might undo all of these changes introduced by CMIP 7 repack. Yeah, also the quality control is mandatory, and there is a file-level quality control applied by the ESGF publisher when you hand your data over to the ESGF data node admin for publication. Each file will be checked with a certain quality control tool, and when a file does not pass the mandatory checks, then it will be denied access to the ESGF. We have a new file-level QC tool available for that. It is the CC plugin WCRP. It is a plugin for the iOS compliance checker, and it checks for the conformance with the CMIP 7 output requirements, CV and DRS. We really recommend you to use this tool early on when setting up your data standardization workflow, so you will not have any unfortunate surprises when handing your data over later for publication. To make this application as easy as possible for you as data providers, there is the ESGF QA tool that conducts the file-level QC for all files of your simulation, additionally conducts dataset level checks, and also aggregates and summarizes the check results in a user-friendly manner. So we encourage you to run this for all of your simulations before you hand them in for a ESGF publication. And yesterday in the REF session, we heard that they will soon publish some data quality requirements for the REF. The tools presented here, they cover most of these checks that are required by the REF, and how to exactly configure those two tools to get your data checked and ensure that it is REF ready will be circulated, for example, via the CMIP 7 guidance pages. And now I will hand over to Matt. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Just a last couple of slides before we finish for more questions. Obviously, once you've prepared your data, quality controlled it and published it, there's the last action on modeling groups to make sure they sort of maintain their data and, as needed, update or upgrade their data sets as you extend things or fix issues. And there's processes for retraction as well. both of these sort of are important processes to allow the users to get used to accurately use the data, but all of them need to be documented by errata. Okay, last slide before we go to final Q&A. Online resources, we really want to point everyone at the CMIP 7 guidance pages, where we're trying to put in links to all the documents that we will need for using data, for preparing data, and ESGF and the like. We've got the Q&A forum on GitHub, which we'd like to use for questions beyond this talk. If you've got something that you don't know about, ask the question there and we'll try and get back to you on that. The bit.ly link is on the slide there as well, and there's also an archive of communications from the CMIP IPO. So if you're trying to work out when a particular message went out, you can go and look for it there and see if there's anything you've missed. We're here for the rest of the week at the infrastructure help desk in room B2. So sort of feel free to turn up and ask us questions there. But I think we've got a few minutes left now for further questions.
Thank you very much. A lot of information. I'm not sure I got all of them, but I hope there's a good documentation we can read. But my question is, what will happen if a simulation doesn't pass the check?
If you don't pass the QA checks for ESGF publication, you will not be able to publish the data. So you have to go back and correct metadata.
And the modeling centers will be informed about that? Or?
They'll be expected to do this check as part of their publication process.
Okay.
So first of all, thank you. This was so much. I felt slapped by so much stuff. But great. And so I guess my question plus suggestion comes from this, which is being one of the co-chair of a MIP and having fielded questions about CMIP data for the last 6 years. Now there's just so much new stuff, and so it would be great to have, or I wonder maybe if there's already some plan to have sort of some like training sessions for sort of like ambassadors for all of these things, because I already struggle taking notes of all of these, right? So it would be useful to have some pyramidal way to make sure that the people who are gonna then end up answering the questions know how to point to all of these things. So not on the modeling center side necessarily, yep, but the people who normally help coordinate assessments or these kind of things.
Yep. Thank you. Yes, we have run drop-in sessions for modeling centers a little while back, but I take your point. It would be good to do that for the MIPS as well. It's something we'll take into account. More questions in the room or online?
We had one. Sorry, I've just lost the Slido temporarily there. Okay. So there was one I think we didn't address about additional sector variables being added. So I guess a general answer to that question is that the data request is pretty stable at this point. There may be further releases if they're needed to correct errors. But the time for proposing variables to be requested, that was a process the data request task team already went through over the past year and a half or so, gathering a lot of community input to decide what variables would end up in the data request. Thanks. How much time do we have? Okay. Okay.
If I may, just another question.
Please.
So all the world is talking about storage problems, and if I see 131 variables as a core, and if you compare that also with the statistics on the usage of the data, is there any idea of trying to reduce these kind of things?
That's a process that I believe the data request task team went through when they were discussing the data request entries with the various different communities which are using that data, and modelling group representatives were involved there as well, I believe. So remember, the data request is what the modelling group, what the community would like. It's not what everyone doesn't. Not every group has to produce every variable. It's good if we can get a consistent set, which is what that core variables group was trying to get a more consistent archive, but there's room to account for what capabilities you have.
Yeah, go ahead, and then we'll go to one online.
Yes, so thanks for all this information. I have a question from a MIP perspective. So MIPs are no longer kind of endorsed by CMIP, but still we want to have experiments on ESGF, and so somehow the MIPs need to register too, I guess. Can you and register their experiments so that modeling groups can then put them on ESGF and then search for the experiments, or how does that work?
So most of that is controlled by the controlled vocabularies. So for the fast track, we've got, I think, all the experiments into the definitions of the experiments that are allowed. Once we've got sort of the infrastructure up and going, then more focus will come back to finalising the processes by which you can propose new experiments. So it's relatively straightforward to propose a new MIP, an experiment. We just need to get the processes involved in having that specification of experiment flow through the rest of the infrastructure. Something we'll be working on over the next few months. So I expect the CV's task team to continue working on that, and there'll be more information announced once we've got that process ready.
Okay, thanks.
In the minute we have left here, there's a question online. It is, will the model documentation include information on what forcings data sets each model used? So the essential model documentation that has been described will not include that information. There has been discussion of how that information might be tracked, because it would be quite useful, but that's an evolving discussion, I would say. It is worth adding, though, that the guidance has recently been updated to clarify for each experiment exactly which forcing data sets should be used, and you can find that on the guidance pages.
Yeah, so that information for the experiment specification will be on the guidance pages, but it'd be up to modelling groups to document what they've actually done themselves.
We are out of time, but there are quite a few questions online. So what the WIP will do is take a look at those and add them with answers onto the discussion board, the WIP discussion board.
Yep. On the CMIP 7 guidance, the link to the question and answers section and in the discussion section of GitHub. Lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.